Hey, what's up, Street Gods? It's Eric Kim from the Eric Kim Street Photography blog. So today's perspective lesson is talking about perspective. The basic concept is photography is all a matter of perspective. And when I say that, what I mean is two things. First of all, your perspective as a photographer and a visual artist, which means how you see the world, how you perceive the world, what kind of emotions you get from the world, what you're trying to say through your photos. And secondly, basically, your compositions. So the first thing I want to talk about with you is actually the second point, which is embracing more unique perspectives in your photography. So the first photographer I want us to talk about is a photographer named Olli Nagi. I'm probably butchering his name. But the reason I love his pictures, oops, that's not his work. Okay, so the reason I love his work is he was able to essentially be the original rooftopper. He's embracing very high angles, looking down. And you could see the way he cuts off his angles and his shooting from a lower angle, looking up, getting much more aggressive, dynamic compositions. I'm not 100% sure what camera he shot with, but you could kind of see that he's using some sort of medium format camera where he's actually looking down into the lens, which allows him to get a unique low perspective looking up. And the cool thing is a lot of digital cameras nowadays is you got a LCD screen in the back or even a swivel screen. And so using the swivel screen could be a good benefit where you're shooting from super low angles looking up. And the benefit of shooting with more unique perspectives with your camera is that you essentially could photograph normal reality, but you're presenting it in a novel way. So for example, in these pictures, you kind of, I'll show you guys a combination of super low angle perspectives looking up and also super high perspectives looking down. And one of the benefits of shooting from a high angle looking down is you generally tend to simplify the background. There's less clutter in the background with super high angles looking down. Even one pro tip, what you guys could do with your cameras is, assuming you have an LCD screen in the back of your camera or even a tilt screen, hold the camera up super high up in the air and shoot looking down. So this is an example of a low angle looking up, high angle looking down. And this is an example of one of my pictures of me shooting from a super low angle looking up. It just kind of gives you a much more dynamic, edgy composition, and also it helps you simplify the top of the frame. And also often by shooting from a very low angle, shooting up, you'll get all these interesting leading lines. This is a photograph I shot of a woman in a bar in Berlin and shooting with a Ricoh GR in P mode, program mode, 28mm with a flash from a low angle looking up. You could see how it adds much more dynamism in the picture. This is another picture by Laszlo from super low angle looking up. And in terms of the composition, you could see one very good technique that he does is he's trying to get the edges and trying to get diagonals to come extremely from the edges. And what that does is it creates a much more dynamic composition. And one thing they call this in the cinematography is the Dutch angle or the Deutsche angle, where you're tilting your camera intentionally to add more dynamism and flair into your images. Another great photographer to study in the similar vein, his name is Alexander Rodchenko. And once again, you can see it's very simple. He's just photographing ordinary subject matter from very low angles looking up. I love this picture from Alexander is shooting from very low angle. Look, in terms of the composition, note how he's connecting the edges of the diagonals from the frame here and also all these leading lines here. And the fun thing about these super low angle perspective shots looking up is when you look at it, the viewer is slightly confused for a second. You're looking at the image and thinking to yourself, what exactly am I looking at? Which is fun and kind of gives it that novelty. Another lower angle shot looking up. I think this is actually a picture of Alexander's mom. I love the movement of her arms, the hand, the glasses in front of her face. Another picture of a kid with headphones, perhaps listening to some radio or some spy device, I don't know. And you can see how Alexander, he tilts the frame and it creates this off-center composition, which makes the composition much more dynamic. Also in terms of the composition, I love this circle here, the circle here, the circle here, and the intensity of the kid's face. Sometimes getting onto fire escapes looking up, looking down, gives you a cool perspective, or from ground level looking up, or getting very, very up high and looking down, waiting until the light hits the shadows just right. And it's interesting because you could kind of see that, I mean, essentially any of us could do this. The problem is most of us as photographers, we're always shooting at, eye level. A better practical tip in photography is to crouch down very low, get close to your subject, look up, and you could see it just exaggerates these shapes and forms like this tuba or trumpet player here. Or architecture, this is a great example, shooting with a wide angle lens looking up. You can see all these nice crisscrossing lines and these converging lines. It creates a much more dynamic composition. Or even a picture like this, a man on the phone. But you first look at the image and you're a little bit confused. You're like, wait, what exactly am I looking at? You can see Rodchenko probably had the camera up very high, shooting down. This is probably by far one of my favorite Rodchenko pictures, is him shooting from a low angle of this little girl looking up. And you can just see, they call this the Superman effect, that by shooting from a low angle looking up, you make the subject look larger than life, more powerful, more confident. It's a really beautiful picture. And then you can look at the catchlight in the girl's eyes. Or a shot very high looking down, you can see simple, clear, white background. And that's another practical tip to make better pictures. And the reason why shooting from a high perspective looking down works so well is that it helps you simplify the background. To show you guys some of my pictures, so generally most of my favorite compositions are shot from a very low perspective looking up. And the reason I like to do this is that often you could simplify the background or you can integrate more interesting compositions. So this is a picture I shot of Cindy in Saigon, shot with a flash at night with the Ricoh. And you can see this nice curving line, and intentionally, and none of these pictures are cropped, I try to get the edges of the frame here and the edges of the frame here, and all these leading lines leading straight to her face, and it was her idea to do the hand gesture. It's quite good. And in terms of the composition, to create more dynamic compositions, try to look for the curve in the frame, because the curve adds much more dynamism and movement into the frame. Also, little details I like about the picture, the lips, the eyes. And the way I was able to make this picture is I'll just walk in the streets of Saigon with Cindy, and often the best strategy is to first look at the background and look for interesting lines and shapes and forms in the background, and then crouching down, photographing your subject against the interesting background. A picture of Cindy in looking beautiful in her yukata in Uji in Kyoto, low angle looking up. Another example in Saigon. I saw this kind of interesting halo disc shape in the background here in Saigon, and crouch down, Cindy's idea to do the frame in the frame. And you could also see the reason why the composition is much more dynamic is that you have a nice triangle composition here as well. Shot with a 24mm lens in Tokyo, or Kyoto, from a low angle looking up, like small details like the tie clip, the man in the suit looking a little bit depressed, and this little poster in the background like stacking hearts or something. And another practical tip when you're shooting street photos is just try to get a simple, clean background. It's a very basic principle that a lot of us photographers often neglect. And so you can see in this picture, I'm shooting with a 24mm lens, so you got to imagine how close I was. I was probably about one arm length away, if not a little bit closer than one arm length away. And just a simple, clean, white background to give the subject a nice pop or figure to ground from the background. A shot with a Ricoh GR 28mm lens, low angle, P mode flash. And you could see by getting very, very close and crouching down super low and shooting up, you get all these nice leading lines and this edge and this perspective, which makes a much more dynamic image. Another picture of a man I shot in New Orleans. Love the attention, and also with the Ricoh GR, super low, looking up. I probably shot about 90 pictures of him, and this one's the best one. And you could also see by shooting from a low angle, you could get much more distortion around the edges of the frame. So this actually makes his hands look larger than life. And to me, it makes a much more interesting picture. I like the shadow above his head, his glasses, and also the color palette of the orange, the blue, the green, and the pink. Another woman, photograph of a woman, got very close. I had the Ricoh GR, and I was looking at the LCD screen, crouching out super low, and holding it down at a very, very low angle looking up, and it kind of gives you that surreal look. And also a tip I got from my buddy Neil Ta was I shot this picture probably minus exposure compensation. So either minus 1 1/3 exposure compensation, minus 1 1/2, or minus 2 exposure compensation to get this dynamic picture. And in terms of colors, I really like the reds juxtaposed against the green and a little bit of the purple of her head. Another example, when you're shooting in a crowded area, the good thing about shooting from a low perspective looking up is you could just simplify the scene. This is a picture I shot of a man in a very busy festival in Tokyo, and you could see that by shooting from a low angle looking up, I was able to isolate his face against a simple gray background. Just another urban landscape in Uji. And this is a picture that my buddy Harold shot of me with my Matrix jacket. And you can see this is me with the Ricoh GR shooting from low angles looking up. A few last pictures of some high angle perspectives I had shooting downwards. So this is a picture I shot of Cindy in some sort of square. And I shot with the camera, holding the camera up very, very high, Ricoh GR once again, looking at the LCD screen. And when I'm shooting, look at the background, try to simplify the background, look at the edges of the frame to make sure the edges of the frame are simple and clean. What I particularly like about this picture is these little white squares here, sectioned off. And also I kind of like how the fact that she's a little bit out of focus. And by shooting from a high angle looking down, you just simplify the background. Go on top of a skyscraper looking down. I was at an overpass in Tokyo and essentially tried to create a nice color palette composition. I like the greens here, the blues, the reds here, and took about probably 10 pictures, tilting the camera in different angles. I like the lines here, and the curve here. It's quite nice. And you could also do this when you're going down escalators. This is us at a mall in Kyoto from a high angle looking down. And yeah, so practical assignments for you guys to practice is try to make a nice picture of of a subject, your friend, your family member. You can even shoot this with your iPhone, or if your camera has an LCD screen, even if you just have an optical viewfinder, just hold your camera up from a high angle looking down, just shoot blind, and try to keep the background simple and clean. And also one of the best practical tips about embracing better perspectives in your pictures is try not to crop, because I don't think there's anything wrong with cropping per se, but by not cropping, you're going to be a lot more cognizant of the edges of your frame and therefore compose better. And also, yeah, see if you could embrace a super low angle photograph. Once again, look at the edges of the frame and look at the background. Try to get curves or nice lines in the pictures. And if you're shooting street photography, one of the tips I have is trying to shoot in a busy downtown area where you see lots of buildings, skyscrapers, where you could get these nice leaning lines, and somehow try to get the subject's head smack dab in the center of the frame. Yeah, so those are some practical tips I have for you guys in terms of embracing perspective. If you guys want to learn more about Eric Kim blog, just go on the Google, search Eric Kim blog, and also I'll include a link to this in the description below. But yeah, even having the supplementary article, Photography is All a Matter of Perspective, where you could, if you prefer to read instead of watching the video, I talk a little bit more in depth about how you can embrace different perspectives in your photography. I'll do a part 2 of the video to just kind of share with you guys some inspiration and tips in terms of why you should assert your own artistic perspective to the pictures. All right, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Peace out.